These are some of the great works of Charles Dickens, a writer who in his works highlights the descriptions of people and places, both real and imaginary. You can find any of these books below in the description. The first great work of Charles Dickens is High Expectations. It tells the story of Philip Pip, an orphan boy who lives with his sister Sarah, who mistreats him, and her husband, a blacksmith named Joe Gargery. In a desperate life as a blacksmith's apprentice, Pip dreams of his destiny changing. One day they take him to the house Satis, Miss Havisham's mansion, a crazy and mysterious wealthy who hires him to play with his granddaughter, the beautiful Estella. What Pip doesn't know is that Miss Havisham will use it as a way to avenge the disaster that her fiancé made at her wedding by leaving her at the door of the church with everything ready. Miss Havisham, who stopped all the clocks in her house at the fateful moment of her move, educates Estella to have a cold heart and treat men with disdain so that they do not betray her like her. Pip is the first victim of that plan. The second work that we will highlight from Dickens is A House to Rent. It was first published in the special Christmas issue of 1858 of the Household Words magazine, of which the writer was director. Dickens requested the collaboration of 3 authors who wrote regularly in the magazine, Adelaide Ann Proctor, Elizabeth Gaskell, and Wilkie Collins. The object of such literary diversity was the publication of a series of the Household Words magazine dedicated to a central theme that became the focus of the contributions of all these authors. A House for Rent revolves around a mysterious building that Sophonisba, the old woman who tells the story, watches from her window. That house for rent is dark and desolate, and nobody seems to inhabit it. Urged by curiosity, he will ask for the help of his butler, Trottle, and his best friend, Jabez Jarber, to find out why the current state of the building and what is behind its walls. 6 different texts will form the puzzle and shed light on that dark house in Perpetual Income. Another of the great works is A Story of Two Cities. In this historical novel, life is narrated in the 18th century, at the time of the French Revolution. The story takes place in 2 countries, England and France, and in the cities of London and Paris at the dawn of the French Revolution. The first city would somehow symbolize peace and tranquility, a simple and orderly life, while the second would represent turmoil, challenge, and chaos, the conflict between 2 worlds at a time when drastic social changes are announced. The action has no place in or around London, something unusual in Dickens. It takes place in Coketown, a fictional city in northern Victorian England. The description is considered to be based, at least partially, on the city of Preston. We are given perspectives of the moment from 2 very different points of view, that of the proletarian class, which believes that work is its only model of life, and that of the upper class, which controls factories and keeps its workers in very bad terms. We are also shown another type of life, that of the circus people, which is completely complete of the 2 groups mentioned above. Dickens shows us all this with an ironic background, without making a clear critique of the society of his time until the last pages of the work. Another great work of Dickens is Little Dorrit. The work is a satire of the incompetence of the government of the time and the hypocrisy of Victorian society. A good part of Dickens' criticism focuses on the debtors' prisons of the time, places where debtors were imprisoned, unable to work, until they somehow paid their debts. In many cases, the debtor spent decades in prison before being amnestied at the evidence of his inability to pay, or died in prison forgotten by all. To criticize this situation, Dickens places much of the plot in Marshalsea Prison, on the right bank of the River Thames as it passes through London, described with intensity, especially because the author's own father was imprisoned in it. A good part of the rest of the criticism focuses on the social problems of its time, industrialization and worker safety, the incompetent and unnecessary bureaucracy of the British administration, for which he creates the fictitious Circumlocution Bureau, whose main mission is how to do nothing, or let him do it, the inability of British society to recognize individual talent or contempt for the upper classes towards the lower classes. The next is Life and Adventures of Martin Chuzzlewit. My tutor thinks so much about himself that, if I don't do the same, they will forget me. This life plan is that of young Martin Chuzzlewit, raised by his grandfather rich in interest and distrust, especially of the many members of his own family, that everyone conspires to inherit. When the young man falls in love with Mary Graham, his grandfather's lady, and unleashes his anger, he seeks refuge in the home of another relative of his, Mr. Pecksniff, an architect who has never built anything in a vivid image of meanness and hypocrisy. And what is true for families is also true for society. And finally, perhaps the most popular novel by Charles Dickens. Oliver Twist. Oliver is an orphan boy who spends his early years at Mrs. Mann's orphanage. Like the rest of the children in the orphanage, Oliver is constantly hungry. Oliver becomes a trainee at the Sowerberry Funeral Home, however, he fights with a funeral home employee and decides to escape to London. On the outskirts of the city, tired and hungry, he meets Jack Dawkins, the pillaster, who offers him a place to stay in London. Full of innocence, Oliver is immersed in the underground world of London and is in the middle of a band of pickpockets, directed by the evil Fagin. London is described as a succession of labyrinthine streets and alleys, courtyards through which Oliver is dragged, and in which he perceives poverty, dirt, or crime. Remember that you can get any of these titles below in the description. 3. These are some of the great works